Yo, what is up, Wallet Guard? How we living?
Doing good. How are you doing, Alan?
Oh, we are doing so well. Thank you so much for joining. We wanted to chat with you for a little while. I know you always have alpha to share, so I know this is gonna be a great conversation. Andrew, how we doing?
Doing well, wallet guard. Big fan. It saved me once. It'll probably save me again.
Well, Wallet Guard's out here saving lives for real. Not all heroes wear capes, but Wallet Guard certainly deserves one. Well, Wallet Guard, honestly, if it's okay with you, if you could explain a little more context on what Wallet Guard is, how Wallet Guard works, and where Wallet Guard currently lives as well, that would probably be great to start off the convo.
Yeah, absolutely. So at WalletGuard, we're building user-centric security tooling. So what that really means is right now we have a client, like a B2C facing extension. And the extension is designed to basically do proactive phishing detection as well as transaction simulation. So we provide a multi-layered defense. So we're able to actually even detect wallet drainers before you connect your wallet to a website, before you simulate a transaction or anything. And it's all based on behavioral patterns and yeah, that's kind of like a high level overview. If you're looking for Wallet Card, you can just go to our website, walletcard.app. And then right now it's completely free. So feel free to try it out and let us know if you have any feedback.
And I know you're a co-founder as well. And I met you in person. That was awesome. Out in Indianapolis. It's a beautiful place. Maybe like a little background on yourself. Like I know you're really interesting. Been up to some interesting stuff in the past. So that'd just be great for us to hear as well.
Yeah, so my name is Ohm. I'm one of the co founders of Wallet Card. My background's been in cybersecurity. I've been passionate about cybersecurity since I was like 15, funny enough. First got introduced to crypto around 2014. And yeah, I've been around. I got really active in the space. I would say around 2017, though. So ever since 2017, been very active in the crypto space. And yeah, just to give you a little bit more, I guess, clarity and background as well from the work experience wise. Like I said, been passionate about cybersecurity since I was 15. When I got to my university, I was able to do cybersecurity work over there. And then on top of it, I went and worked at Accenture doing red teaming. So basically, like ethical hacking, reporting bugs, stuff like that. So I did that for like about close to 2 years at Accenture, and then left Accenture to start Wallet Card with my other co-founders, Martin.
That's quite the background, man. That's awesome. We're happy to have you in Web3 on the good side because there's plenty of people maliciously hacking in Web3. So I'm glad we got one of the good ones. In recent years, there's been several instances of cryptocurrency exchanges being hacked and funds stolen. What are the most frequent causes of such hacks? Are they tech? Are they human error? And what steps should exchanges take to maybe strengthen their security infrastructure and protect those user funds?
It's definitely human error, right? So the common saying throughout crypto is that the weakest link in any information security system is definitely the individual using it.
Gotcha. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And I guess can you kind of walk us through it's a little strange that the same mistakes keep happening. Like we have lots of examples of people clicking links and whatnot. Like why is the human error consistent? Like you would think people would learn over time. Like is there just not enough information out there for people to get educated on how to avoid this? Like can you kind of walk us through why these mistakes keep happening?
Yeah, I wish it was simple, but I think the issue with it is that one, it's like a lack of education and then a lack of tooling as well. So like in Web 2 specifically, there a lot of the security responsibilities typically will fall on a corporation. But when you get into Web3, security responsibilities fall on the individual. So that's like the key differentiator, really, in my opinion, when you get into Web3. Like the entire responsibility shifts from like a bank or an institution to an individual. And oftentimes people aren't, even accounting for their Web2 security. So when they get into Web3, it's like a whole new shit show, right? It's like they have no understanding of like, they click I accept and I agree to everything. But that mentality is like conditioned into us from Web 2. But you get into Web 3, and now one time you make one mistake and you click I accept or I agree, you could drain your entire wallet.
Yeah, you really are one click away from losing everything in the space, which is why you guys are so important. And I kind of want to ask again, like, what are the potential security risks associated with mobile wallets for cryptocurrencies? A lot of people use mobile apps on their cell phones. Are there any additional security practices you recommend for mobile wallet users?
Yeah, for mobile wallets specifically, it definitely depends. So a lot of mobile wallets, right? They use hardware. They use your like secure enclave on your phone or your device. So secure enclaves are, traditionally they're very secure, right? But the issue with like people transacting on mobile is they're often transacting on unsecure networks. They're often transacting places they shouldn't be, or like holding all their assets on a hot wallet on their phone. So if it gets stolen or something like that, the issues can happen like that. Um, and then Android, Android tends to be susceptible to a lot of different types of malware as well. But so does Apple. I mean, Apple's had their fair share of 0 days in the past. So mobile wallets definitely can be put at risk. But the other thing is that like security layers like Wallet Guard or other extensions out there, we don't necessarily have too much mobile compatibility yet. So a lot of the time, like you're not able to do like the transaction screening or understand exactly what's going to happen on your transaction before you make it. So that oftentimes can also lead to a lot of loss. But yeah, from a high level, I would say, phone wallets should kind of be treated as hot wallets unless like there is a very specific way to do it where if you have a device that you solely use as like your wallet, it can kind of be treated as a hardware wallet, but that's only if you're not doing anything else on there. You're being very careful about everything you're doing. People have, I've heard of like, people taking old devices and formatting them brand new and then, using solely as like as a hardware wallet. So, I mean, that's definitely a feasible aspect. It's all really about your security hygiene. If you're on a device and you're using it for everything, you shouldn't be like, putting all your crypto on that device, right? Because that device is the most susceptible compared to your other devices.
For sure, and you mentioned Apple and Android, so there's not really any difference in the devices in terms of one is better for security versus the other. Like, is that fair to say?
Um, in my opinion, Apple tends to be a little bit better, but it's not necessarily Google's fault either. And the reason being is that Android being like open source, or well, like being able to be distributed on so many different like hardware devices, there can be introduced like new vulnerabilities through like hardware, which is kind of out of control of Android. But the way that Apple works, since their ecosystem is closed source, it makes it a lot harder for attackers unless they reverse engineer. I'm not necessarily advocating for closed sourcing all of your code, but in some cases, some people practice security through obfuscation, which isn't necessarily the best practice. But I know this is a very technical answer, but um, you know, technically speaking, in Apple's ecosystem, since it's a closed ecosystem, they only allow certain types of hardware to interact with their operating system. It definitely locks down the amount of, the attack surface that is available. And predominantly, why you hear people say like, Macs don't get viruses, not true at all, by the way. But the reason why people say that is because a lot of attackers like to target like the wider net, and the wider net is very much on Windows. But Macs can definitely get viruses too. They're just not as commonly targeted because it's a smaller amount of people using them.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I go back. I used to work with some of the large tech companies from a security standpoint back in the day, and I was always shocked because I always thought, to your point, I always thought it was an Apple kind of technical feature. And to your point, what they would always say over and over was, the base of Android users is so much larger globally. Like the pot is so much larger, and to that point, it's like there's less opportunity, I guess, for them from an Apple perspective.
Thousand.
Yeah, 100%.
So one thing I'd love to jump into, obviously here you've got a lot of DeFi lovers, and there's obviously a lot of differences technically between centralized exchanges, decentralized exchanges. Could you talk a little bit more about kind of the unique security challenges that decentralized exchanges and DeFi face compared to more kind of TradFi and centralized solutions?
I'm sorry, I missed that part. I was breaking up a little bit. Could you repeat that question?
Yeah, no worries. So just comparing kind of the DeFi versus the TradFi landscape, or even decentralized exchanges versus centralized exchanges. Can you talk a little bit about just some of the security risks or things to take into consideration in DeFi that maybe are unique to DeFi and less relevant to kind of TradFi and centralized exchanges?
Yeah, so I think it kind of comes back to the point I made earlier about how the responsibility shifts. And it's very similar for like, TradFi. TradFi, like a lot of the security responsibility falls on the brokerages, falls on the exchanges and stuff like that. But then you get into Web3, a lot of that responsibility falls on you, especially if you're self-custody, right? And to some regard, just like TradFi, like if you were using like Coinbase or like Binance or something like that, they're being responsible for your security. Obviously, you are responsible to some extent to like, enable 2FA and, secure passwords, stuff like that. But outside of that, the large bulk of the responsibility of security would fall on the exchange. But then once you start self-custodying, and that's where a lot of DeFi applications work, right? They work with self-custody wallets. That's where security risks become greater because if you go to one wrong site, and again, you sign one wrong signature, that you're leading yourself to a compromise and potentially draining your entire wallet.
Yeah, I mean, it's a dual-edged sword out here. You are your own bank, but the buck does stop with you. And I guess we'll dive into some smart contract questions here. Smart contracts are an integral part of the blockchain. Like, what are the key security considerations when designing and implementing smart contracts? Like, are there any best practices developers should follow to prevent vulnerabilities and exploits? And then, if you could just share your thoughts, on Trail of Bits, Certic, and others as well, that would be great.
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with Trailbits, and Certic and Halborn, and there's plenty of great auditing firms out there. But auditing is crucial, right? Like if you're deploying a smart contract and you're, handling assets or custodying assets and even an NFT contract, right? Like you should 100% be getting your stuff audited. The thing with smart contracts is they tend to be immutable unless, there are exclusions to that case. Like if there's proxies or updatable contracts, that's a little bit different. And that actually poses a little bit more of a risk as well. So updatable contracts being like, let's say you have approvals to this and then this contract updates and something happens. Now you're putting yourself at risk. This is why it's important to like revoke unnecessary approvals and stuff like that. But then with exact smart contract risk, I'm not necessarily a smart contract developer, but from a high level perspective, I can say that there are like just like in Web 2, there's like a top 10 mistakes or like top 10 vulnerabilities. In Web 2, there are top 10 vulnerabilities for like Web 3 and smart contracts. Like for example, one of them would be like reentrancy. There's several different ways to potentially exploit a smart contract. And again, that's why it's so important to have like thorough auditing, and making sure all of your like anytime you're deploying new code, like it's also audited again. So it's like the immutability of like the actual smart contracts kind of puts it at risk because like you have to make sure from the longevity of the contract it's not going to get exploited. So that's why it becomes a lot more difficult sometimes to secure these smart contracts.
And I'm sure because this is somewhat of a new industry, there's not a lot of people that are even able to audit smart contracts efficiently, right? Like the talent pool to do that is relatively small, you would say.
I don't know about. Okay, so yes and no. To some extent, it's like the talent is there, but it's pricey, right? So it's like paying for like audits from Certic or Halborn are not cheap. I mean, obviously there are firms out there that are probably a lot cheaper. There are firms started by ex Halborn and ex Certic employees that might be a lot cheaper and following similar practices. But a lot of the time, people get an audit from Certic or Halborn because they actually get a lot of PR from it, which is funny. But that's become kind of part of the culture. Like, oh, you have a Certic audit, or hey, you're not a Docs founder, but you're Docs through Certic's like KYC program. So that's where there's like some responsibility with like these different parties and like who you pick.
Yeah, it certainly seems out of all the places to save money, maybe auditing would not be the place to do it. But to each his own. And I guess as cryptocurrencies become more mainstream, what are some of the emerging security threats or trends that you're seeing that users and businesses should be aware of? You kind of have your hand on the pulse here of this industry. And how can individuals and organizations adapt their security practices to stay ahead of these evolving risks and in the malicious hackers that are out there innovating ways to steal our crypto every single day?
Yeah, I mean, staying a step ahead is really like, utilizing tools like WalletGuard or other tools out in the market. And also taking time. Like, I think the most important thing that people don't do is like take a breath before you make a transaction. Don't rush into things. Like, if you're about to FOMO or like, feel like you're about to miss out on something, take a step back, evaluate the opportunity. Does this make sense? Do I want to be, and here's the other question you should ask yourself. Do you really want to be the first person that mints this NFT? What if something's wrong with it? Because a lot of the times before people do stuff, they don't read the smart contracts, right? Like people have the typical understanding that they don't need to do much due diligence because like this is like a verified project. So many of my friends follow it. It must be fine. Like those assumptions can be very dangerous, and that's why you typically don't want to be the first person to mint something. You kind of want to see how sentiment plays out, and then you want to do stuff. So that's just my 2 cents. And if you are going to mint something, use a burner wallet, right? Like that's another low hanging fruit. Like load up a burner wallet, use that for your allow list address, and then mint on that burner wallet if you really want to be the first one. But as long as you take adequate precautions, you can do anything you want.
Yeah, where I think Wallet Guard will come in clutch is like the flipping culture that just kind of, is in this space. Like people move very quickly and you're 100% right. Like they do not read the smart contracts. And, the research is like, they scan the Twitter page for about 5 seconds and see if they like the profile picture. So, definitely your like product is going to help people save a lot of money when people like just rapidly are constantly flipping in this space and trying to catch that next 100x. So I do love that. And I do kind of want to ask you about Ledger as well. Like, Ledger was all over crypto Twitter a couple of weeks ago. Like, can you kind of break down why people were so upset? Is there a legitimate reason for the outrage and concern, in your opinion? And what are the current cold wallets of choice right now? Has that changed at all?
Not at all. I think, again, this is a big misunderstanding. I mean, let me first preface that Ledger had terrible comms. I actually had the pleasure of interviewing the Ledger CTO the day of all the FUD. So when I talked with him, like he explained and broke down a lot of these concepts, right? But the underlying issue, right, was that people had like a very flawed misunderstanding of how hardware wallets work. They assumed that their device could never extract private keys or something along those lines. It's not necessarily true. It's again coming back to the whole idea I brought up earlier about secure elements or secure enclaves. Secure enclaves and elements are meant to be accessed, but in a very secure fashion. Like your phone uses them to store like your credit card information or a whole bunch of information on you that's very sensitive. But now, that information is meant to be accessed and utilized, right? It's just, there are only certain approved people who are able to access that signed up, that's a secure element or secure enclave. So, in the same fashion, like you're putting trust in Ledger, right? And that's like the moral of the story. But you put trust in a lot of things on a daily basis, right? You put trust in software not to push a malicious update. You put faith in your iPhone for being close source software. Like you put faith in your hardware for your Android device, and that type of understanding, it just wasn't there. People didn't understand necessarily how cold wallets work. They just assumed it's 100% unhackable, which is not true, right? Like Trezor has hardware vulnerabilities. If someone gets a hand on your hands on your Trezor, they can hack into the Trezor, right? But like so far, to our knowledge, like people aren't able to hack into your ledger like that so far. So, you know, in my opinion, nothing really changed. Just don't opt. In my personal opinion, I wouldn't recommend using Ledger Recover. It's just my 2 cents. I mean, nothing changes on your Ledger device unless you opt into Ledger Recover. That's the moral of the story.
Yeah, I think there was some concern that like there could be a potential third party, like a government or agency that could potentially extract your seed phrase. Like that was like what some people were saying. That's not. You wouldn't say that that's an accurate reality, correct? Like that's like not something that people should be worrying about.
It's not like it's not a okay. So if you didn't opt into Ledger Recover, there's a zero sum chance that that can happen to you. But if you let's say you did opt into Ledger Recover, there is a non-zero sum chance that that could happen. It's very slim, but there is a potential. I mean, you have to understand that the way Ledger set up the infrastructure for their Ledger Recover, they have it in 3 different countries, 3 different jurisdictions. Now, you can't say that they are all NATO jurisdictions, so maybe there is some collaboration to make that happen, but it would be a very rare circumstance to get 3 governments on board in order to subpoena. Well, you need two actually. You need 2 governments on board in order to subpoena Ledger to get a private key from someone.
Dang, that is kind of crazy though. That's a crazy reality to think about. But continuing with the wallets, I know you have an upcoming space with MetaMask. How did you two get in touch, and what will we probably hear in that conversation?
Yeah, so the MetaMask team and us, we've been in touch for quite some time. We first met one of their co-founders, Dan Finley, a while back. And ever since then, we've developed a relationship, been in touch with them, talked a lot with their security team, and just collaborated a lot on stuff. So naturally, the relationship formed out of there. You can expect that on a quarterly basis, we'll be doing a space with MetaMask talking about the state of security. So that'll be like a recurring thing. But yeah, we're going to be talking about, latest trends. We're going to be talking about stuff like the atomic wallet hack and like, the random wallets that nobody has really figured out are just being randomly drained. It's up to like, I can't remember the exact number, but I want to say around 40 million so far that nobody really knows why it's being drained. So we're going to be talking about a lot of really cool stuff, talking about how to keep yourself safe, general security practices and, answer any questions that people really want to bring up or have answered.
Yeah, maybe a little release of the mask token. Just kidding. But yeah, that is a little spooky. The wallets being drained. What's your POV on that? Like, it's a little strange that some people who you would think like have really good security, are OGs in the space, have a significant amount of capital, are waking up and their wallet's gone, and it's a little strange how this is happening. Like, do you have any insight in that?
Not sure. I mean, I would have to assume that it's got to be some sort of private key leak or seed phrase leak, something. But nobody really knows how. That part hasn't really been determined yet. People don't even know if it's like, did somebody like break the, encryption algorithms and like, there would be a lot bigger problems. And I think people right now are in the theorizing mode where they're trying to like speculate on how this could have happened and then prove whether their thesis is true. So, a lot of research is being done. There's a ton of independent researchers looking into it. But it's going to take time to find the answer. I mean, like a lot of times, like these unknown vulnerabilities, like it takes time to discover.
Yeah, certainly attack vectors can emerge out of nowhere, for sure. And I guess the next question I have for you is, you released your AI companion chat Web3. Can you tell us a little bit about like what your experience of working with AI has been so far, and what can we expect from chat Web3? Was this just what kind of AI tool is this?
Yeah. So Chat Web 3, the whole idea, we've always focused a lot on education and onboarding. So this is kind of our contribution to helping the onboarding flow as well as the education flow. We think that Chat Web 3 is going to be like very useful in the sense that, people who are getting onboarded into the space, it's great onboarding your friends, but they have a million questions, right? And you can't spend every, waking hour helping them out. But you can answer all the questions that feel deeply technical, but even those questions could be asked to Chat Web3. So the beauty of it is that it's trained on all things blockchain, Web3, and security. So it's essentially, we like to think of it as your personalized onboarding companion. And future state, we're going to see some cool stuff. Like in the transaction simulator, imagine Chat Web3 is able to be accessed there, and now you're able to have a conversation about the transaction you're about to make. Like you can ask it, why does it need a set approval for all for this transaction? And now you'll be able to understand a little bit more about like how marketplaces work on the back end and stuff like that. So we see this as a way to really shed a light on like how the underlying operations of the blockchain work that a lot of people don't necessarily understand.
Yeah, AI has certainly been a great tool for a lot of people. There has been some, doomsday scenarios with AI. Like, what do you think about the horror scenarios that people are painting? Like, are you not really worried about AI getting out of control and we see like a Skynet, scenario? You think we're gonna be able to, keep this under control and whatnot? Like, what are your thoughts on those kind of predictions and that fear?
Yeah, you're crazy if you're not worried about that. Is my thoughts. But the second thing is that we we're probably still a little ways away from something like that, or like sentient AI is like. I mean, I'm not an AI expert, but I imagine that we're probably at least like 30 years away, hopefully. So, um,
I'll jump
I
in for 2 seconds. I worked in AI at Amazon for 3 years globally, and it's interesting to me to see like the amount of hype that's happening in the industry. But I agree with you. I think obviously like the rate of learning can exponentially increase as the technology gets better. But I do agree with you. I think we're a little further out than the average person thinks.
Well,
Yeah, but that being said, it's still, it's still terrifying because
Yeah.
even like non-sentient,
Yes.
even non-sentient AI can be very, very deadly, right? Like there's something that just came out. I think I'm not sure if this was fake or not, but so take this with a grain of salt. But there was like some U.S. Air Force drone that's being like trained with AI, and apparently the whole its operation, its like main mission protocol was to like take out these comms tower, but then they introduced like a fighter, like a U.S. pilot or whatever, to test it to like get in its way. And what it tried to do was tried to kill the operative that was in its way because its main objective was to get to this comms tower. And it was like, so there are some crazy situations like that where people don't understand. Like I don't know if it's like people don't understand, but people don't necessarily consider like if you tell the AI that its only mission is to do something, and you don't tell it that these are the constraints you have to operate within, you're gonna see some crazy stuff.
that's love. And that's also the kind of story. If it was true, the government would definitely be like, "Nah, fam, we don't know what you're talking about." And I guess on the brighter side, are there any AI tools that you use, that you've actually enjoyed, like outside of like, Chat GPT or Mid Journey? Like what about things because that you're like a security expert. You've been doing this for a long time. You probably have your head in the space, more than other people. What other tools maybe that people are sleeping on that maybe can improve just their daily work life even?
Auto GPT is very cool. It's like Auto GPT is like a way for you to kind of understand what AGI is going to look like. And that AGI stands for like artificial general intelligence, and like I think that's it's a very early indication. Like Auto GPT is nowhere near perfect right now, but it's a very early indication of what something like artificial general intelligence could look like. Task based like execution, like tell it. Um, your goal is to make me $1,000, and then it basically goes out there and tries to create accounts, maybe make like a marketing agency, whatever it wants to do, right? The whole idea is that it's like quote unquote artificial general intelligence, so it's able to like take actions, and like these agents, right? So agents are very cool because it's like it can actually tell itself what it needs to do next, which is really, really cool. And I'm speaking from a very high level here, so I'm sure Andrew, maybe if you want to talk a little bit about AGI and like what the implications are.
No, no, I think you're hitting the nail on the head. I mean, the one thing I will say that's interesting about AI, just from the years that I worked in that space, was a lot of times it's exactly the same issues that you're talking about in Web3 and crypto. It's human error. It's like someone, to your point, didn't give it proper parameters, or someone's password was insecure, or someone didn't set up proper 2FA. But it is interesting to me just to see how much human error is often the the cause of these technical problems, because I think the average person doesn't always think that that's the case.
That's lovely, man. The magnitude of error, that can come from that is just lovely. I just want Jarvis, man. I don't know if you saw Iron Man, but if I could just get like a Jarvis in my day to day life, like that's all I really need. Like we can stop innovating after that. Um,
Apple Vision Pro, man, that's gonna add Jarvis. It's gonna be next level. Just you wait, okay?
bro, it's $3,400, man. Did you? What do you think about that? That's definitely an Apple price. But are you going to be acquiring one of those? Are we going to start seeing some selfies in the Apple Pro from you?
Listen, I'm a degenerate at heart, and I think the thing is super cool. It's like the way I like to think about Apple and how they deploy stuff is like they very much will sit on the back lines for like 2 years, 3 years, and perfect the technology before they release it, and or at least make it feel perfect, even though it might not be perfect yet. But they'll do their best at making it feel perfect. I'm kind of excited to see what Apple's going to be able to do. Yeah, that's just my take.
Yeah, I feel a little bad for Mark Zuckerberg, man. It's like you gotta. I mean, not that bad, but still, like you release that product, you change your company name, it flops, and then it's like, oh yeah, Apple's like, we've been building a way better product this entire time. But that's just kind of the way that this business works, I guess. Let's talk about private keys. How can users kind of help ensure and help protect their security of their private keys? Is there any recommended practices for seed phrase management that you can discuss?
Yeah, so recommended practices. Okay, so it very much depends, right? Like my issue is that like right now, I personally think seed phrases are kind of it's going to be old technology really soon, because I think the way that people currently like interact with Web3, like it feels kind of archaic, like that we're using seed phrases, and like if we lose this seed phrase, like your entire wallet's compromised. So the idea that has been introduced as of lately about social recovery, MPC technology, and Shamir key sharding, like this is all some pretty cool stuff. Like Shamir secret sharding has been around for quite some time now, but it's not been applied necessarily much into blockchain and Web3. But now we're seeing a lot more implementations of it. Um, and just to give you an idea of what Shamir key sharding is like, let's say you take a private key, you're able to split it into three different keys. And now, in order to recover your seed phrase, you only need two out of three keys. That's like social recovery. So, like, you could give one to your parents, you could give one, or you store one yourself, and you give one to maybe like your best friend or something like that. So, like, that's like the idea of like social recovery. But then there are other implementations. Like, there's another company out there called Zengo, which does it with like Face ID, biometrics, and that's how you can recover your shards. So it's just like there's going to be some very interesting implementations of like how seed phrases and private keys are protected. But I guess standard stuff is like don't ever share it unless like don't ever share the full version, I guess, because now people are sharing the shards, but don't ever share like your full private key with anyone or share your seed phrase with anyone. Like that's just very basic knowledge. The other thing is never like store it digitally either. So like if you have like your private key or your seed phrase, like you don't want to be writing it down on your notepad in your computer and saving it on your desktop, right? That's not secure. So you want to be writing it down, keeping it offline as much as possible, and especially with hardware wallets. Like if you're buying a hardware wallet, the idea is for the seed phrase or the secret recovery phrase or the private key necessarily won't leave the device. So you want to make sure that you write stuff down rather than storing it anywhere digitally, like not on your notes app on your phone. Like these are all important things to make sure that you're not leaking that by any means digitally.
That's great. So one thing I'd love to jump into, one of the things I do with new hires is I take them through, kind of a security step-by-step process just to make sure they really understand kind of all the risks. And obviously the number one rule is don't click links. So can you guys talk a little bit about just phishing attacks, maybe some best practices, how folks can protect themselves, and then maybe even just talk a little bit about like what are the telltale signs of a phishing attempt? Obviously, some are very obvious, but there's some that are a little more sophisticated that I'm sure folks would benefit from understanding.
Yeah, so phishing attacks are like, I think people don't know this as often. It's a pretty cool fact, but 98% of hacks like start with some form of phishing, right? Whether that be like a SIM swap or something like that. Like, by the way, shout out Hasib down in the audience. He made an awesome product called Fani. So like if you're a high net worth individual looking to avoid getting SIM swap, check out Hasib and what they're doing. But the whole idea about like phishing, right? Um, Phishing is one of those things where they're trying to take advantage of an individual. So there are very, very different forms of it. Like one could be like hacking like Steve Aoki's account, right? And then posting something on Twitter. And that again was a SIM swap. So that's why I gave a little shout out to Steve there. But that was a SIM swap that led to Steve Aoki's account getting compromised and posting a malicious link, and then people go and mint that. That's a form of phishing, right? But then there are other forms of phishing where it's like somebody DMs you and builds a relationship with you over like the next 2-3 months, and then they finally make the ask of you to try and get you to do something. So that's like the whole other side of phishing, right? And phishing is very much like it's all social engineering. It's about like taking advantage of the individual, and this is why I mentioned earlier the weakest link in any information security system is the person using it themselves. So that's why looking out for these types of things, looking for call to actions, looking for urgency factors, or even like making actions like with someone you don't necessarily know. Like there's a lot of people we meet on the internet, right? Especially with Web3, but we can't trust everybody. We don't know them like that to trust them like that. So that's a consideration you have to make, right? And you have to be very cautious about who you're going to put your trust and faith into, and be very careful about the information you're willing to give up.
Yeah, and I think like one thing I would add to that is also just kind of self motivation. I mean, like one of the trickiest kind of versions of this that I've seen is obviously folks impersonating well-known crypto companies, creating job postings on LinkedIn. The next thing you know, someone's clicking on a fictitious job posting, information's getting stolen. So you got to really be careful. I mean, I think these phishing attempts, we assume they're happening on crypto native Web3 platforms, but candidly, you can get targeted pretty much anywhere.
Yeah, like the Harmony Bridge when they got like exploited for like hundreds of millions of dollars, they were using a multi-sig, which is another thing I forgot to bring up, but multi-sigs are fantastic. I'm sure we can dive into that a little bit later. But the whole thing with them using a multi-sig was that, their employees were looking at these job offers or I forget if it was a job offer or an application. And once they opened these PDFs, they got actual malware on their computers. And then they were able to steal the private keys of these individuals. And now when they had the private keys, they could, and a big issue on Harmony's front was that they only required 2 out of 5 signers for their multi-sig, protecting hundreds of millions of dollars, which is very dumb. But that led to them getting their Gnosis safe drained.
Yeah, and like two things just to call out even beyond that, I think that people are maybe less familiar with. Like one is when that type of software can get embedded into a computer and infected, like they can be watching every keystroke and logging it. They can be literally watching the monitor. So it's interesting. Like I remember with a junior that I had years ago, we had like a 1Password account set up, and they said to me, well, why doesn't it just show me the passwords? Why are they hidden? And I walked them through that, and yeah, it's just things that you have to be very well aware of.
Yeah, I guess so. When somebody steals hundreds of millions of dollars, like in that compromise, like there's not really a way to like offboard that, right? Like it's pretty somewhat easy to track. Would you say, or is it pretty easy to disappear into the wind once a hack is completed?
Yeah, so sorry. The question was like, when someone makes that, like when a hack happens, like what are they doing after the fact? Is that
Yeah,
the
like
question?
all the currency can be tracked on chain. So you can call up Zach XBT and be like, hey, just follow these funds. When they eventually get to a doxed wallet, that's the idea, right? Is there like how are the hackers like moving this amount of money without being detected?
So in the case of the Harmony Bridge, it was North Korea, so they don't necessarily care. They use the money to fund their nuclear programs, and Zach XBT is fantastic, but the person that's really tracing those types of hacks is going to be like chain analysis, right? And those are like the real chads when it comes to forensics. So yeah, I mean, tracking it is possible, but if the attacker's smart, they're just not gonna use like tornado cash. Like the funny thing is, like the government OFAC has put an OFAC ban on tornado cash, but in reality, tornado cash was probably the most trackable thing they could have done, right? So you banned the one that people were using, and it was fairly trackable. So that was very stupid on the government's part, in my opinion. Um, like, and the reason why I say it was trackable, just so I guess people understand how mixers work at a core, is that smaller amounts when they get mixed, that's like very untrackable, right? Because there's a lot of people swapping smaller amounts and stuff like that. So that becomes a lot more obscured and obfuscated, harder to track down. But then when you have like $100 million, you're gonna notice like some big chunks of change that add up to like that money that was stolen sitting on Tornado Cash. Now you're going to be looking for those output flows. So that's like, that's how Tornado Cash gets like broken down. But then if you look at, there's a whole bunch of other mixers which I'm not going to name, but they work. And then there's also Monero, right? Like, if you're a smart attacker, you're going to use Monero because Monero still to this day is untrackable. Um, so, the FBI and the government has put up big bounties on people who could crack Monero, but it's just really not possible, at least to date.
Yeah, one thing I want to speak a little bit about is obviously this is such a global industry. Folks are constantly traveling for conferences. A lot of companies are fully remote. You're seeing folks, move to other countries, play a little bit of the arbitrage game in real life. Can you guys talk a little bit about just public Wi-Fi? Obviously sometimes that might be your only choice. I know there's, some obvious security things to be aware of, but could we just talk a little bit about, if you find yourself in one of those situations where you're having to use, a Wi-Fi network that's not yours, what are some steps that folks should take to really protect their assets?
Yeah, this one's easy. First off, like if you're on an unsecured network, please don't ever be doing anything sensitive. Don't log into your bank. Don't make transactions on your mobile wallet. Don't do anything stupid. Second, you know, you should get a VPN. Like honestly, first you should get a VPN. Let me take that back. First is like get a VPN, secure your network traffic before you do anything. And people don't understand, like if you're on an unsecured network, all I have to do is just sit there and listen in on the network. Um, or, let's say you're at Starbucks. Starbucks Wi-Fi names are pretty standardized most of the time, from my experience. So what attackers will do is like they'll spin up it's called a rogue access point, and this rogue access point will have the same name as the Starbucks Wi-Fi network. But now you'll connect to the Starbucks. You'll think you're connecting to Starbucks Wi-Fi, but in reality, you're connecting to a malicious threat actor who is now able to reroute your traffic however they want. So that's the other consideration. And then imagine if they did some stuff like the more advanced stuff like SSL stripping, and now they're able to get like plain text credentials being transferred and stuff like that. So it's like very important that you don't connect to public networks and start doing sensitive things.
Any specific VPN providers that you like or you recommend to folks? Because I think another thing just to be aware of is, there's a lot of free VPN options that sometimes can also be questionable.
Yeah, so Mulvad is a very good one. I know a lot of people use like Express and Nord, but I've heard like things about like Express and Nord maybe like logging and stuff. So I don't know necessarily much about like the privacy practices of Express and Nord, but I mean I do know that Mulvad is so good that Tor browser collaborated with them to make up another browser. So, and if you know anything about Tor, they definitely care about their privacy and anonymity. So and Mulvad accepts payment in crypto, and Monero specifically too.
Throwing a little alpha out there. Awesome. Thank you so much.
There's a lot of W's right there. Well, I guess what role does encryption play in securing cryptocurrencies? Can you kind of explain the different encryption techniques that are used in the industry?
Uh, what do you? Okay, so I guess what would you mean by that question? Because encryption can be applied at different levels.
I mean, nothing too deep, man. Like, just like a base security level, like our technical understanding, or at least mine, is somewhat limited. So just like at a high level, if you could just go over, like, what are the current ones that are being implemented today? What are you kind of seeing? Are there any innovative techniques that are going to be helping the common people down the road? Anything like that would be great.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of it exactly, but I believe like the encryption a lot of like people use and like Solidity. Don't quote me, I might be wrong on this one. I'm not an encryption expert, but and that's the other thing. Like when it comes to security, that's why I kind of avoid saying the term expert ever anytime, because like security is such a broad subject where like one side of things you could be like a massive like governance and compliance nerd, or you could be a massive like web app security nerd, or now you're an application security nerd or a network security nerd. So it's like there's so many different facets where you can get so deeply technical in. That's why it's hard when people say like security experts. I'm like, oh God, please don't call me security expert. But yeah, okay. So that preface aside, I think SHA 256 is pretty common encryption standards, and that's what's used pretty broadly throughout like Web 2. And then I think Ethereum uses like Kekik or something like that. It's like it's spelled really weird, but it's like some Kekik 256 or something like that, and it's a variation, I believe, of SHA 256, which is an encryption algorithm, and they're fairly good. And it just depends, like when it comes to encryption, it very much depends on what you mean. Like for example, when people say like end-to-end encrypted messengers, right? So, okay, I guess this is a good way to kind of talk about it. So, like, some people have been talking about the whole idea of wallet to wallet messaging. So, and they want these wallet to wallet messaging to be end to end encrypted. So, now that you have public key, private key practices with, like, how wallets are already implemented, you can use, like, things like PGP, which is pretty good privacy, in order to encrypt and decrypt messages. So, this is what a lot of darknet marketplaces actually use. So, like, not. Without saying too much, like when you're on a darknet marketplace, like you're placing an order for whatever you're doing, they use like PGP, like pretty good. It's called pretty good privacy, and the whole idea is like you have public key, private key that can sign messages in order to ensure that the only person that's decrypting it is the person who's receiving the message.
Gotcha. Well, that sounds like some pretty innovative technology that's coming down the road. It's good that people are going to get more protected as well, because I know security is an ongoing issue. And like I know you're not a security expert, but you do know a lot more than most people. Are there any resources that you can point us to learn more about security in this space, like that we can develop our own understanding and knowledge, like podcasts, newsletters, Twitter accounts? Like I see you guys are constantly sharing a lot of updates, which is great. But for your own self, like, is there anything that you're personally consuming?
Yeah, I mean, Officer CIA is really good. Hacker News is really good. Hacker News is a Y Combinator newsletter. They do a lot of good educational articles. And sorry, my puppy's whining right now, if you can hear that. But yeah, there's a lot of good resources out there, like ZachXBT, Tavano. There's like tons of fantastic researchers in the space that I look up to as well, and when it comes to newsletter, I think Bleeping Computer is fantastic. I'm a big fan of Bleeping Computer. They put out a lot of good vulnerability reports and stuff like that. Um, but those would be like my go-tos. And then if you're like looking and interested in learning about actual hacking and stuff like that, Portswigger is a really, really good tool. Like they made a tool called Burp Suite, which is like the web app hacker's best friend. Um, so if you ever do anything like that, you're definitely using Burp Suite. Um, and then, like I said, that's Port Swigger, and basically they have something called Academy over there, which is like a whole like hands-on labs experiment where you can go and like interact with these interactive labs and try these different vulnerabilities out and stuff like that. So that's really cool about learning about the threat side of things. And then alternatively, there's other platforms like Hack the Box, which Hack the Box allows you to essentially spin up like a vulnerable virtual machine and you can test your attacking skills against it.
That's great, man. Look, it's great that this is recorded too, because people can listen back to that. Because look, you really are immersed in the space, so the resources that you share are definitely ones that myself and I would recommend other people take a look at as well. We just got a couple more questions for you. I know that your puppy wants your attention and that your time is valuable, so we'll make sure that we get out of here, in a reasonable time. How does the concept of proof of stake impact the security of blockchain networks compared to proof of work? Like, are there any unique security considerations for proof of stake based networks?
Yeah, when it comes to proof of stake, it's about consensus mechanisms. So I might misspeak here, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. But with proof of stake networks, it's all about consensus and governance. So it's like, there's this many people on the network and they're staking their assets in order to secure the network and basically voting on proposals and stuff like that. And then there's the alternative, which is like proof of work networks, which are like compute based, like actual like it requires like mining power to validate the blocks, and it's a lot more mathematics. Like, and yeah, so they're very different. Like, there are 51% attacks on like proof of work networks. So, like, for example, at a time, I'm not sure if this is true anymore, but there was a time where China had the ability to do a 51% attack because a majority of Bitcoin nodes were operated out of China and mining was operated out of China. Before I think they dropped some bans and stuff like that, but there was definitely times where 51% attacks were a lot more feasible, and essentially you would need 51% of the compute power in order to tell your ledger, like updating the ledger of the blockchain, to say something that you wanted it to say, essentially. Versus proof of stake is like governance based and like based on like token holders and stuff like that rather than actual compute units.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, 51% attacks. They're are they becoming less rare? Would you say? Are we kind of being able to circumvent that, or are they still kind of somewhat prevalent?
I don't think they're prevalent on like big networks. Like, I mean, BTC is always, there's been a talk. It's always been a talking point for Bitcoin. Ethereum, not so much anymore. And then alternatively, but on smaller projects like DeFi and stuff like that, with like smaller LPs, it's definitely prevalent because, like, you've seen, we see sometimes attackers, what they'll do is they'll take out a flash loan and like have like a ton of liquidity, and like then they're able to like execute some stuff. So it's very finicky. It is rarer that you'll see, but it's very possible too, especially with the idea of flash loaning, like flash loan attacks. I believe, I might be wrong here, but I believe flash loan attacks sometimes utilize the privilege or like the philosophy of like a 51% attack.
Gotcha. Yeah. Thanks for breaking that down, man. Definitely, you understand this stuff at a way better level than the rest of us. So definitely good to hear your POV. And the last question we kind of have for you is, what's next for Wallet Guard? What does the rest of 2023 look like for you guys? Are you guys going to be going to a lot of conferences? Are we going to be seeing you, out, in Miami or whatever? Like, can you guys break down like what the rest of this year looks like, and maybe even beyond that as well?
Yeah, I love Miami. Got a lot of friends down there, so I'm definitely going to be at Art Basel. We'll definitely be at Permissionless. People are currently trying to talk me into going to ETHCC. A lot of people from the MetaMask team and some other investors and my investors that I know are going to ETHCC in Paris. I don't think I'm going to make it out to Paris. Pretty short notice. Um, but yeah, I'll definitely be at DEF CON in Vegas, which DEF CON is like the world's largest like hacker convention. It's super sweet. Like they have this like leaderboard for like people that get pwned. So like if you go on the networks and you're connecting to unsecured networks, they have like a leaderboard of like people who connected their devices unsecurely. So you don't want to be on that leaderboard. It's the first leaderboard you don't want to be on. It's crazy. Like the amount of like crazy hacker stuff that happens at DEF CON is like nuts. And I guess a little bit of alpha for anybody going to conferences or anything like that. Turn off your Wi-Fi and turn off your Bluetooth. This isn't like, you can, if you go, like, for example, if you have an iPhone, you just like scroll down and bring control panel up, and you just disable them there. That's not going to do the trick. You actually have to go in your settings and turn them off. Because like what it does when you go in there and just turn them off there, it briefly turns them off for like, a couple of hours and stuff like that. So you definitely want to have to go in the settings and turn those off when you're at a conference. And the rationale is, one, you don't want to be connecting to random networks. And that example I gave earlier about like rogue access points, there's a whole process of like handshakes that happen. So it's like your phone is constantly, whether you understand this or not, broadcasting out like looking for networks that it knows, unless you tell it not to. So like people often, if you go in your settings, so this would be a little good experiment, is like go in your settings, go to Wi-Fi. Do you have the ability to auto join new networks on? If you do, then it's trying to join every network it finds that's open. If you don't, then it's not. Alternatively, if you do have like a bunch of networks you've connected to, it's still searching for those networks and still sending out those handshakes and looking for those networks. So all a rogue actor has to do is be a node and say that a rogue access point and be like, okay, I hear this handshake for home network. Now I just have to make my SSID home network, and next thing I know, I have your password for your home network. So that's like a consideration. And then for Bluetooth, Bluetooth is actually one of the most vulnerable protocols in existence. So you just don't want to be using Bluetooth in like conferences and stuff like that.
Yeah.
One thing I'd love you to just add to that is, obviously a lot of folks in this audience, I'm sure, also go to conferences, might have necessity to be connected. Obviously, you can turn on the VPN. What's your thought on MiFi devices? Do you recommend folks have personal MiFi devices just so that they can always stay connected to their own network versus public networks?
When you say MiFi, are you talking about like personal hotspots?
Yeah, exactly. Like you can, like for anyone in the audience that's not familiar, for a couple $100, you can purchase them from Verizon and T-Mobile, and then you basically have a device that's maybe 2x the size of your cell phone.
Yep, 100%. I'm an advocate. I would prefer that people use like those types of things like personal hotspots opposed to connecting to public networks.
Thank you, sir.
Love that. Well, look, man, we appreciate your time. This was a great space. You shared a ton of alpha. I'm glad it's recorded. People can listen to it. Maybe even your great grandkids one day will be listening to this and be like, wow, my grandfather was on the forefront of whooping ass in the security realm in crypto and Web3. So I love that. Andrew, any final words, sir?
No, I'll just close it out with a big thank you. I mean, obviously this has been incredible, so much alpha. But just to close it out on a personal note, we met in Austin at Consensus, and I personally thank the Wallet Guard guys because the anticipation. I'm not exactly sure how you guys phrased the technology, but the anticipation of what was going to happen to my wallet, thanks to Wallet Guard, was effectively the reason that I declined transactions and didn't get hacked. So really great technology that you guys are building, and obviously bringing a lot of value to the space as a whole.
I appreciate that. And yeah, if anyone has any questions ever, just feel free to tweet at us. We're happy to answer anything.
100%. Well, look, everyone, we appreciate you guys tuning in. Follow Wallet Guard, follow Ohm. Basic Degenomics is brought to you by Hashflow. We have dope conversations with dope people every single week, like Wallet Guard here. And look, we just appreciate everything you do for the space, and continue to crush. And we will see you on the timeline, I'm sure.
Take care, everybody.
Much love. Peace.
Peace.